The Valley Current.
Imagine walking into a room, but not just any room.
Right.
You're stepping onto the stage at the Waldorf Astoria in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
Sitting right in front of you are 300 of the most cynical, hard-bitten journalists in America.
The toughest crowd imaginable.
Literally. And you look a little closer, and there is the sitting president of the United States, beside him, the entire cabinet.
Yeah.
And here's the kicker. The detail that just makes the air in this room thick enough to cut with a knife. You were doing this exactly 90 days after a shotgun was fired right near this very stage.
Wow. Yeah, the tension there is it's palpable.
It's so heavy. It's a room just waiting for a single wrong syllable to completely fracture. Yet one man walks in, takes the microphone, and absolutely controls the consciousness of that room for 35 uninterrupted minutes.
Without missing a single cue.
Exactly, without missing a cue.
It's the definition of a high-wire act, you know? But what makes it so compelling is the psychological pressure cooker of that specific environment.
Right.
You have 300 people whose literal job is to detect nonsense, surrounded by the highest-ranking political power in the country, in a setting layered with recent visceral trauma.
Yeah, the cognitive load required just to speak coherently in that room is immense.
Let alone actively manipulate the attention of every person in it. I mean, it borders on the unbelievable.
It really does. I remember reading about this performance and thinking, there is just no way this wasn't staged.
Like he had plants in the audience.
Yeah, like plants or people feeding him lines through an earpiece. The level of dominance he had over that room felt entirely superhuman. But that brings us to the core of our deep dive today.
Right, the newsletter.
Exactly. We're unpacking this fascinating piece of research. It's ELG Newsletter No 2026-09, authored by Jack Russo. And this document takes a forensic, almost microscopic look at that exact set.
The mentalist Oz Pearlman's historic headline performance at the July 24th, 2026 White House Correspondents Dinner.
Yeah. And the newsletter analyzes the performance through a very specific lens, which is what we're going to get into.
It maps Pearlman's live set directly onto his upcoming book, Read Your Mind, which Viking is publishing in October 2025.
Right.
The goal of this analysis isn't to review a magic show. It is to reverse engineer how a human being achieves that level of attention craft.
So we are going to break down 12 highly trainable habits that Pearlman used, analyze the underlying neuroscience of why those habits work, and figure out how you, the listener, can apply these same mechanics.
Whether that's in a high-stakes board meeting or a tense negotiation.
Exactly. Before we get into the mechanics, though, I do want to establish a very crucial frame for you, our listeners. This source material, by necessity, contains mentions of highly polarizing political figures who were in the room.
Right, it's unavoidable.
It is. We will be discussing Donald Trump. We will be mentioning Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, among others. So I need to make it crystal clear right off the bat. This deep dive takes absolutely no political sides.
None at all.
We are not endorsing any political viewpoints, nor do our sources.
That is an essential distinction. The political figures mentioned are discussed in the source material strictly as case studies in human psychology.
Right, they're just subjects.
Exactly. Subjects in an ongoing experiment on room dynamics, status, and, attention control. The analysis strips away all the partisan context to look purely at the behavioral and neurological data.
The raw data of what happens when human beings interact under pressure. So, treating this as a pure behavioral laboratory, let's start with a foundational question.
Okay.
We are talking about a mentalist. Now, to the average person, that just sounds like a magician in a nicer suit.
Right, yeah.
What actually is a mentalist in the context of what we're studying today?
So the newsletter uses this brilliant analogy. It frames a mentalist as a detective for feelings and choices.
A detective.
Yeah, where a traditional detective might look for a scuff mark on a floorboard or a microscopic fiber left at a crime scene. A mentalist is looking for biological and neurological clues.
So they're reading the microscopic human data that the rest of us just filter out.
Precisely. A split-second hesitation before answering a question. The specific way a person breathes, the micro movements of their eyes.
And the document also brings up this concept of two hands, that a mentalist operates with a left hand and a right hand.
Yes, I love this concept.
Let's unpack that because it sets the stage for everything Pearlman claims in his book.
The two hands concept basically separates the reality from the illusion. One hand is real, authentic observation.
So that's the applied psychology part. Reading posture, analyzing vocal cadence, actively listening to someone's word choice.
Right. And the other hand is the method. That is the trickery. The forced outcomes, the hidden information, the invisible sleight of hand.
The actual magic trick part of it, the part where the deck is rigged.
Exactly. And Pearlman is world-class at using both hands simultaneously. But the thesis of his book, Read Your Mind, focuses almost entirely on that first hand.
The observation hand.
Right. He makes the argument that what the audience perceives as supernatural magic is, in reality, just paying incredibly close attention combined with relentless preparation to be ready when the moment arrives.
Okay, I have to be a little skeptical here. It's very easy to write a book claiming that you just pay really close attention, but I mean, talk is cheap.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of performers rely on quick wit, charm, and just sort of winging it when they get out there.
Yeah.
So how do we know this 35-minute set wasn't just a highly charismatic guy improvising his way through a room full of politicians?
Because the raw data absolutely obliterates the idea that it was improvised. This is where the newsletter gets incredibly analytical.
Yeah, the coding they did is wild.
The author meticulously coded Pearlman's 35-minute set, mapping every single action he took on stage against the 12 chapters of his upcoming book.
And what did they find?
In a 35-minute window, they logged exactly 68 discrete doctrinal firings.
68 specific instances where he actively deployed a psychological tactic taught in his book. That is nearly 2 deliberate, conscious psychological maneuvers every single minute.
And here is the statistical smoking gun. It's the distribution of those 68 firings. If he were improvising or just relying on a couple of solid parlor tricks, you would see a heavily skewed distribution.
Like he'd just lean on the stuff he's most comfortable with.
Exactly. You'd see him lean entirely on 2 or 3 concepts, but he didn't. The analysis shows that tactics from all 12 chapters of his book were deployed live on that stage.
Every single tool in the toolkit was used.
Every single one.
The source calls this the flat tail of the distribution. Let's translate that out of statistics speak for a second.
It means that while he used certain core techniques more frequently, which we will get to, he didn't skip any chapter, and he didn't rely on any single trick as a crutch.
Right.
The flatness of that tail across the lesser-used tactics is the undeniable signature of rigorous, disciplined preparation.
It proves it wasn't random charisma.
Right. It was a fully realized, pre-planned architecture.
To put that in perspective for you, imagine a football coach calling a 35-play drive down the field.
Okay, great analogy.
If it's a panicked, improvising coach, they're just going to call their best running play over and over again, hoping it works. But this is like watching a coach use every single formation in the playbook.
Spread offense, tight ends, motion.
Exactly when the defense's shifts dictated, with zero hesitation.
Or consider the cognitive load of doing that while simultaneously managing the personalities of the president and the national media.
Seriously.
And it's vital to note, as the newsletter points out, Pearlman is a middle-aged guy from New York with a receding hairline and a very average vocal timbre.
Right. He does not possess some innate, hypnotic, physical aura.
He's not superhuman.
And that is the empowering meta lesson here. He isn't controlling the most powerful room in America because he was born with a superpower. He is doing it through 3 decades of deliberate, grinding practice of these 12 specific habits.
Which is incredibly encouraging, really.
The implication is staggering. I mean, if he can steer that room using these trainable skills, there is absolutely no reason you can't learn to control the temperature of a tense boardroom, a sales pitch, or even a high-stakes family negotiation.
Absolutely. Which brings us to the first major phase of how he actually executes this.
Okay, let's get into the mechanics.
To control the reality of a room, you can't just project outward. You first have to absorb an immense amount of data from the people sitting in it.
You have to read the environment before you can rewrite it.
Exactly. And the newsletter categorizes this as the observation engine.
Right. This combines chapters 1, 4, and 10 of his book, which focus on seeing the data, feeling it, and remembering it.
And this engine did the heavy lifting. It accounted for 45.6% of the entire set. 31 out of his 68 maneuvers were purely observational.
Wow, almost half. So let's isolate the powerhouse within that engine, which is chapter 10. That chapter treats memory as a foundational superpower.
Yeah, this single chapter accounted for 14 of those firings. That's over 20% of the entire 35-minute performance.
I want to look at the specific timestamp on this because, I mean, this is where my jaw hit the floor.
On the synchronized recall.
Yes. The source notes that at exactly 14 minutes and 59 seconds into the set, he pulls off a synchronized recall. He points into the audience and rapid fires 5 different names: Alex, Kevin, Ed, Aaron, Michelle with 2 L's.
Just flawlessly.
Perfectly recalled, completely under the gun. And then, 27 minutes into the set, without checking any notes or earpieces, he casually references a volunteer from the very beginning of the show saying, "Steve, who thought of Bora Bora?"
From a neurobiological standpoint, doing that under stress is genuinely phenomenal.
Right, because his adrenaline has to be spiking.
Exactly. The newsletter dives into the brain mechanics here, specifically focusing on the medial temporal lobe, which is responsible for episodic encoding.
Meaning the ability to form new memories of events and details.
Right.
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay, go for it.
Is remembering 5 names really a superpower? I mean, most people can memorize a grocery list of 10 items if they just focus for a minute. Why is this treated as such a high-level skill in the analysis?
Because of the environment in which it is happening. When you are public speaking, especially in a hostile or highly critical room, your brain perceives a social threat.
Right. Stage fright.
It's more biological than that. That threat triggers the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, which floods your system with cortisol.
The stress hormone.
Yes. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and it practically bathes the hippocampus, which is a key part of that medial temporal lobe. High levels of cortisol actively disrupt long-term potentiation.
Wait, break down long-term potentiation. What is that?
So it is the physical process by which neurons strengthen their connections to form a memory. Cortisol essentially jams the signal.
Oh, wow.
Your brain is basically saying, we are under attack. Don't worry about memorizing that person's name. Worry about surviving.
So for Pearlman to flawlessly encode Michelle with 2 L's and recall Steve from Bora Bora a half hour later means he has trained his nervous system to suppress that cortisol response.
Exactly. He keeps his medial temporal lobe online while his body is literally telling him to panic.
So it's not just a memory trick. It is supreme biological emotional regulation. He is preventing his own brain from shutting down its recording equipment.
And the social compliance it generates is massive. Think about it. When you remember a tiny detail about someone in a chaotic environment, you signal to their brain that they are deeply valued.
The newsletter calls it a listen, repeat, reply matrix executed at scale.
Yes.
Okay, so that is the memory aspect. But let's look at Chapter 4, which focuses on observing others through what the book calls embodied inference.
The source lobs this firing 11 times.
There's a prime example at 3 minutes and 36 seconds. Pearlman brings a volunteer named David onto the stage and does what mentalists call a globe read. Pearlman looks at him and says, "The shift in the posture, weight on the right foot." He is literally using a microscopic weight shift to deduce what David is thinking.
It sounds crazy, right?
Sounds like absolute Hollywood fiction to me. How does a half-inch shift in weight tell you anything about a person's inner thoughts?
It sounds like fiction until you look at the peer-reviewed science behind it.
Okay.
The newsletter explicitly cites literature by Kuhn and colleagues regarding postural sway and the cognitive basis of illusionism. When Pearlman noticed David's weight shifting to the right foot, he isn't reading a psychic aura.
Right, it's not magic.
No, he is observing a measurable anterior cingulate conflict signal.
Anterior cingulate conflict signal. Let's really dig into the mechanics of that, because if I can read a conflict signal in a meeting, that changes everything. What is the anterior cingulate doing?
So the anterior cingulate cortex is a region of the brain heavily involved in error detection, impulse control, and navigating conflicting choices. When a person is holding a secret or trying to suppress a natural urge to move towards something they're thinking about, it requires extra cognitive bandwidth. That cognitive conflict literally leaks out into their motor system.
Wow. So the brain is working so hard to hold the thought that it accidentally sends a little bit of electricity to the legs.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Yeah.
The effort to suppress spills over into the supplementary motor area. It manifests as microscopic postural sways, like a slight lean, a tiny shift in weight distribution.
And we just don't notice it.
Most of us entirely ignore this data because our ventral attention network just isn't trained to see it. Pearlman has spent 30 years calibrating his visual cortex to notice a subtle biomechanical shift that gives away an internal mental conflict.
That is fascinating. It's not mind reading, it's reading neurological exhaust. The engine is running hot, and Pearlman is just looking at the smoke coming out of the tailpipe.
That's a perfect analogy.
So for you listening, The application here obviously isn't to walk into the office tomorrow and try to read postural sway. You aren't going to suddenly spot an anterior cingulate conflict signal by staring at your boss's shoes.
No. Attempting that without decades of baseline training will just make you look erratic.
Right. The practical application is to start building the foundation of that observation engine.
Exactly. And the newsletter highlights a very actionable exercise for this. Train your listen, repeat, reply matrix by making it a mandatory habit to remember 3 specific, non-obvious details about every single person you interact with this week.
3 details.
Yes. It forces your brain out of its internal monologue and starts strengthening that medial temporal lobe under mild social pressure.
Okay, so observing and remembering is the foundation.
Yeah.
But observing microexpressions is great in a vacuum. This is live television. Human beings are inherently chaotic.
Oh, absolutely.
What happens when a volunteer just flat out ruins the trick? If someone goes completely off script, doesn't his entire observation engine just break down?
It would if observation were his only tool. But that brings us to the second major architectural component of the performance. The newsletter labels this the contingency engine.
This covers chapters 5, 6, and 7 of the book, dealing with pacing, stacking the deck, and recovering from errors. This engine made up 26.5% of the live performance.
Right.
To use a programming analogy, if the observation engine is the code gather the data, the contingency engine is the try-catch logic. It's the error handling protocol for when the system crashes.
I love that. And we get to see this error handling protocol stress tested at the highest possible level.
Yes.
Look at the timestamp at 20 minutes and 38 seconds. The newsletter breaks down what it calls the Frisbee pivot.
Right. This is wild. So Pearlman is a routine setup where he is going to throw a Frisbee into the crowd. Whoever catches it is the randomly selected participant.
It's a standard way to prove you aren't using a planted volunteer.
Right. But the sitting president, Donald Trump, decides to go entirely off script. Instead of participating with the Frisbee, Trump pulls out his own Trump 2028 hat and hurls that into the crowd instead.
For an amateur performer, or even a seasoned public speaker, this is a catastrophic system failure.
It's a nightmare. Your prop is gone, your sequence is broken by the highest status individual in the room, the narrative has been completely hijacked.
Yes. Your working memory is suddenly wiped clean of the next step because the environment just changed violently.
But the analysis notes that Pearlman doesn't even blink. He doesn't freeze, he doesn't try to awkwardly force the Frisbee back into play.
No, he didn't.
He seamlessly swaps the entire routine to focus on the hat. The audience thinks it was a planned bit of spontaneity. How does a human brain pivot that fast without a spike of panic?
The newsletter roots this in a neurological concept called prefrontal simulation, working in tandem with predictive coding.
Okay, break those down.
So, the prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain that allows us to simulate future scenarios before they happen. Pearlman's Chapter 6, which is called Stack the Deck, is fundamentally about spending agonizing hours engaging your prefrontal cortex to simulate every conceivable node of failure.
So it's like a pilot's emergency checklist.
Exactly.
He had already mentally gamed out the decision tree. Node A, what if they drop the Frisbee? Node B, what if they refuse to throw it? Node C, what if they substitute their own object?
Precisely. Predictive coding is how our brains anticipate sensory input. When reality matches our prediction, cognitive load is low.
Because we expect it.
Right. When reality violates our prediction, we get a massive error signal, which is what causes that deer-in-the-headlights freeze.
Oh, wow.
By pre-rendering the failure states, Pearlman ensures that Trump throwing the hat isn't a surprise. It is just accessing a pre-coded branch of his decision tree.
He shed the variance cleanly because the contingency was already written into the script.
Right.
That completely changes how you view a mistake. Elite performance isn't about perfectly executing Plan A. It's about making the execution of Plan D look intentional.
And we see an even more tense example of this earlier in the set. At 7 minutes and 12 seconds, he is doing a routine with Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche.
And Blanche is arguably the highest status volunteer called up to the stage.
Right. And this interaction involves a direct collision with reality. Pearlman is doing a routine involving the actual cash in Blanche's wallet.
Yeah.
Pearlman attempts to guess an amount, but Blanche lies. On live television, Blanche states he has $130 in his wallet when the physical reality is that he only has $85.
This is fascinating because it's not a mistake by the performer. The volunteer introduces bad, conflicting data into the system.
Yes.
Most presenters at this point would either freeze, subtly call the volunteer a liar, which instantly turns the room against you, or just awkwardly abort the trick.
It's a lose-lose situation.
Right. But Pearlman uses a technique from Chapter 7, don't be your own worst enemy. Instead of letting the trick die, he uses the bad data to pivot into a comedic aside about gender dynamics and lying about money.
He turns the failure into the content itself.
Exactly.
The neuroscience behind this recovery is critical for anyone in a leadership position. The newsletter refers to this as divided pale emotion regulation.
Divided pale. Let's visualize that. How does that work in the brain?
When you are confronted with public failure like, say, a volunteer ruining your trick or a client shooting down your presentation, your amygdala spikes.
The fear center.
Right. It immediately initiates a fight or flight response. Your focus narrows, your heart rate elevates, and your prefrontal cortex, your logic center, starts to shut down.
Because your body thinks it's being chased by a bear.
Exactly. The divided pale method means creating a strict cognitive partition. You recognize the physiological panic happening in your body. You put that in one pail.
Okay.
But you force your prefrontal cortex to appraise the situation objectively. That goes in the second pail.
So you are basically saying to your own brain, yes, I feel the cortisol. I know we are technically in danger, but look at this data. This isn't a lethal threat. This is just an interesting new variable.
Yes, beautifully put. He trained his brain to immediately compartmentalize the negative arousal, allowing his logic center to stay online and find the humor in the conflict.
The bad data didn't destroy his system. It became the raw fuel for a new system.
Exactly.
The listener application here is massive. The newsletter says it plainly. Never enter a negotiation without gaming out 5 different outcomes.
You need that net.
So when you are in a boardroom and the CEO completely shoots down your primary slide on page 2, what is your live recovery cadence? Do you let the amygdala take over and get defensive? Or do you have a pre-scripted conversational pivot ready to go?
You have to build your own contingency engine before you walk in the door.
For sure. But, even if you observe the room flawlessly, and even if you have a bulletproof net for when things go wrong, you still face the ultimate hurdle. You have to capture their hearts. You have to win their trust. And in a room full of 300 highly cynical journalists, facts and logic are not going to win their trust.
Yeah, definitely not. Which brings us to the final 2 structural braids of his set. The emotional engine, which accounted for 23.5% of his performance, and the structural scaffolding, which is just 4.4%.
But that 4.4% arguably held the entire 35 minutes together.
Completely. Let's look at the emotional engine first, drawing from chapters 2, 3, 9, and 11. This is all about managing belief, absorbing rejection, and disarming the audience.
Look at the very first second of his performance. Timestamp 0.00. He walks out onto a stage where exactly 90 days prior, a shotgun was fired.
Yeah.
The tension is suffocating. Instead of ignoring it, he immediately addresses the elephant in the room. He opens with a joke against himself. If you're such a good mentalist, why didn't you see that coming?
It's an incredibly bold move.
It really is. He names his absolute biggest weakness, his most glaring vulnerability, before a single journalist can think it. He preemptively inoculates himself.
And from a neurobiological standpoint, this is a masterstroke of emotional regulation for the audience.
How so?
By making himself the butt of the joke regarding a traumatic high-stress event, he is signaling intense vulnerability. In primates, and human beings specifically, vulnerability triggers the release of oxytocin.
The bonding chemical.
Right. And oxytocin actively downregulates the amygdala, the threat detection center in the audience's brains.
Wow, so he is literally disarming the cynics by chemically altering their brain state through calculated self-deprecation.
Yes. And he does it again later with outright rejection. At 16 minutes and 49 seconds, a joke or a read falls a little flat. The room goes a bit quiet.
I hate that feeling.
We all do. But instead of rushing past it or pretending it didn't happen, he calls it out. He pauses and says, I'm getting 6% applause on things that deserve 120.
That is his chapter 3 in action. Fear of rejection disappear. By acknowledging the awkwardness, he reframes the lackluster response as mere data.
It's a shared observation, not a verdict on his worth. He renegotiates his relationship with the audience in real time.
Because if he ignores the silence, the audience feels the social pain. By pointing at it, he breaks the tension and prevents a downward spiral.
Exactly. And then we have the structural scaffolding, which brings in Chapter 8, Ask for Help, and Chapter 12, Tie it all with a story.
This leads to my absolute favorite structural tactic in the whole set. At 21 minutes and 7 seconds, he does something highly unusual for a performer whose ego is supposedly built on being a lone genius.
He brings someone up?
Yeah, he recruits a woman from the audience, Diane Williams. He brings her on stage and explicitly frames her as his mind-reading protege. He makes her do the heavy lifting of the trick.
The newsletter identifies this as leveraging a concept called distributed cognition. By bringing a layperson onto the stage and making her the agent of the phenomenon, he executes a brilliant source monitoring transfer.
Source monitoring transfer. Okay, let's make sure you, the listener, understand the mechanism of that. How does source monitoring work when we are watching a presentation?
So, source monitoring is how our brains tag and remember where information came from. In a high-stakes, highly skeptical room, if Pearlman stands alone at the microphone doing all the magic, the audience's skepticism is laser-focused entirely on him.
Every brain in the room is trying to catch him out.
Exactly. But by recruiting Diane, he distributes the causal attribution. The magic is now happening between Diane and the audience.
So the skepticism is diffused because nobody in that room wants to aggressively attack an innocent volunteer. She becomes a structural shield for his method.
Right. It lowers the defensive barriers of the entire room because the source of the information is no longer just the slick performer, it's one of their own peers.
That is brilliant. Translating this into a playbook for you listening. Number one, state your flaw before your opposition does. If your software product has a known integration limitation, own it in the first 5 minutes of the pitch. Disarm their threat detection center.
Great point.
Number two, absorb a no as information, not an attack. And number three, regarding Diane, recruit an ally for important pitches. If you are delivering a tough quarterly report, don't stand alone at the front of the room absorbing all the skepticism.
Bring in a respected technical lead to share the cognitive load.
Exactly. Distribute the source monitoring.
And finally, you must weave all of these elements into a cohesive narrative. The analysis points out that the entire 35 minutes wasn't a disjointed series of tricks. It was structured as a classic 3-act story.
Right. It moved from the trauma of the shotgun incident through the wonder of the mentalism and ended on an aspirational, unifying note.
The newsletter cites Uri Hassan's work on neural coupling here, and this is vital. When you tell a story rather than just listing bullet points, the listener's brainwaves physically begin to align with yours.
Like they sync up.
Yes, the sensory cortices light up as if the audience is experiencing the story themselves. You get cortisol to grab their attention, dopamine for the emotional peaks, and oxytocin to forge the connection.
Stories stick because they are a biological hack. Bullet points do not.
Exactly.
Okay, so up to this point, we have laid out this incredible architectural breakdown of how he allegedly steered the room.
Right.
The book lays out a deeply compelling thesis that this is all just hyper-focused observation and contingency planning. But as with everything we cover on this deep dive, we have to interrogate the source material.
We need both sides.
Is it the whole truth? The newsletter presents a very rigorous bull versus bear case on the claims made in Pearlman's book, weighing what he preaches versus what he actually practiced on that stage.
Let's dig into the critique, starting with the bull case. The bull case is robust because the performance itself provides immense empirical validation. The doctrine was tested under the most extreme pressure imaginable, and it held. All 12 chapters fired on cue.
Right, and certain elements are undeniably real. The name memory matrix, for instance. You cannot fake remembering 14 distinct names across 35 minutes while being heckled by politicians.
No, you can't. That is a highly testable, replicable cognitive technique.
What else supports the bull case?
Furthermore, the observation chapters have genuine academic backing. The postural sway reads a line perfectly with the Kuhn literature on the cognitive basis of illusionism.
Okay, yeah.
The contingency doctrine, the frisbee-to-hat pivot, is a masterclass in world-class variance management. It's exactly the kind of algorithm that separates elite professionals from amateurs. And crucially, the book establishes strong ethical guardrails, explicitly stating that these observation skills should be used to connect with people, not to deceive them.
But, and there's always a massive but, when dealing with performers, let's look at the bear case.
Right, the other side.
Because the grand finale of this 35-minute set raises some serious questions about that connect, not deceive rule, and whether the book is actually telling the whole truth about how this influence is achieved.
The bear case hinges heavily on the climax of the show. At 35 minutes and 20 seconds, Pearlman executes a truly baffling reveal.
Yeah, I was wondering about this.
He pulls out a signed $20 bill and reads the serial number on that exact bill. The number is 53670,682. That 8-digit number perfectly matches a seemingly random total, over 53 million, generated by a calculator that volunteers had been adding numbers into throughout the act.
Now, I have to push back hard against the premise of his book here. You cannot observe your way into a matching 8-digit serial number.
No.
You can't use an anterior cingulate conflict signal to magically make a calculator hit 53 million. That is pure, unadulterated method. That is the second hand of the mentalist we talked about at the very beginning, the trickery, the hidden math, the rigged deck.
And that is the core of the bear critique. The book presents itself as an observation manual, a guide to reading people. Yet the actual live set relies on heavy, hidden mechanics and outright deception for its most powerful, memorable moments.
The book just skips over that.
The book conveniently ignores explaining how this grand finale is done, presumably because it would violate the magician's code of revealing the trick.
Which leads critics to argue that the book fundamentally undersells the reality of influence. It tells the reader, just pay attention and you can be magic, while hiding the fact that the magic requires a rigged calculator.
There are other significant critiques leveled at the book's contents as well. Reviewers have mocked Chapter 5, which is titled, Forget Tomorrow, Start Today.
Why is it just filler?
Critics argue this is essentially thin self-help boilerplate. Telling someone to set goals and start working hard today isn't exactly groundbreaking neuroscience.
That's fair. The newsletter also highlights a very valid critique regarding the grit doctrine embedded in the book.
Yes, the neurodivergence point.
Right. The underlying assumption that anyone can just force themselves to pay hyperattention or memorize lists through sheer willpower is viewed by some critics as exclusionary. It assumes a neurotypical baseline and ignores readers who may have different baseline executive functioning or neurodivergent profiles.
Which is a very important point. Finally, there's a sharp critique regarding the use of neuroscience itself. Some reviewers suggest that the neuroscience in the book is decorative rather than load-bearing.
What does decorative mean in this context? Like, it's just for show?
It suggests that while the book cites brain chemistry dropping words like dopamine or amygdala, it uses them more as buzzwords to add an aura of scientific authority.
Ah, I see.
Rather than building a rigorous foundational methodology upon them, it's scientific window dressing for psychological parlor tricks.
This raises the ultimate question. Is the book actually honest with its readers? If the biggest moment of the show relies on a rigged calculator, can we trust the lessons on observation?
The newsletter arrives at a very nuanced synthesis of this conflict. It concludes that the book is, in fact, an undersold operating manual for attention control, even with its flaws.
Okay, so it still has value.
Yes. It might intentionally hide the second hand of trickery, the forced math, the pre-selected serial numbers. But the first hand is undeniably real. The observation, the contingency planning, the emotional regulation, those are highly effective, trainable skills.
So when you read the book together with the forensic transcript of the White House set, it forms the clearest public case study we have of applied attention control. It is the illusion of spontaneity backed by a very real, very grueling foundation of deliberate practice.
Which leads us to the final and perhaps most important section of our deep dive. We've spent this time analyzing how Pearlman steered the consciousness of the most powerful room in Washington. Now, the newsletter demands that we turn the mirror on you, the listener.
The author of the newsletter poses a series of highly provocative self-reflection questions. And we need to unpack these slowly, because this is where the theoretical neuroscience bridges the gap into your daily professional reality.
Let's start with the concept of contingency. We spent a lot of time discussing the frisbee to hat pivot, noting how it took less than 3 seconds to execute without a spike in panic. The question posed to you is, what is your live recovery cadence when plan A fails?
Think about it. When a client cuts your meticulously planned 30-minute pitch down to 5 minutes right as you walk in the door, what happens in your body? Do you visibly panic?
Does your amygdala hijack your prefrontal cortex?
Right. Or do you have a pre-rehearsed, pre-simulated pivot that sheds the variance cleanly? Have you built the try-catch algorithm for your own failures?
And regarding structural scaffolding, we discussed Diane Williams, the audience member he brought on stage to shield himself from skepticism. The question for you is, who is your Diane?
In a high-stakes environment, who is the helper you bring in to distribute the causal attribution? We all want to be the lone hero, but that makes you the sole target. If you are delivering a controversial new strategy to a board of directors, do you stand there alone absorbing all the heat? Or do you strategically bring in a respected peer to share the cognitive load?
I think the most cutting question references the Todd Blanche lie. Remember, Blanche took the $85 in his wallet and inflated it to $130 on live television.
A 53% inflation to save face.
Right. The newsletter asks the reader directly, what are you inflating in your own numbers right now?
Oof. What reality are you distorting to protect your ego? And how incredibly vulnerable does that make you when a sharp observer, a mentalist in the boardroom, notices the discrepancy in your postural sway?
Finally, there is the question of ego and effort. Pearlman practiced obsessively for 30 years to make a 35-minute set look like a spontaneous miracle. The newsletter asks, what are you 30 years into? Are you claiming credit for the grueling practice? Or are you trying to look like a miracle worker?
That is the ultimate trap of leadership. Amateurs pretend their success comes naturally. True professionals highlight the grit and the systems that keep them afloat. Which brings us to the neuroscientist's verdict at the end of the newsletter.
The events of July 24, 2026 weren't just a magic show. They were essentially a naturalistic experiment in cognitive misdirection with maximum ecological validity.
Maximum ecological validity is academic speak for saying this wasn't a sterile lab experiment with college students.
No, this was the real world, a sample size of 300 highly defensive, powerful subjects. And the experiment proved undeniably that human consciousness is narrow, it is sequential, and it is easily steered regardless of the status, wealth, or power of the audience.
The ultimate takeaway of this deep dive is a message of profound, almost intimidating agency. Attention is trainable. Your medial temporal lobe's memory capacity is trainable.
Contingency planning and prefrontal simulation are trainable. Emotion regulation and the divided pale method are trainable. Structuring your pitches as story arcs for neural coupling is trainable.
There is no magical gift. There is only the rigorous application of practice.
If a man with average genetic endowment can control a room of 300 cynics and the President of the United States using 12 practiced habits, the mechanics of influence are mathematically available to anyone willing to put in the reps.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought for you to mull over as you go about your week. We so often excuse our own failures, a pitch that fell flat, a negotiation we lost, a room that just went completely cold on us, by telling ourselves a comforting lie.
Yeah, we say things like, well, the other person just had natural charisma.
Or, I'm just not a gifted public speaker. We treat success as a binary trait. You either have the magic bone or you don't. But as we've seen in excruciating detail today, that diagnostic landscape is murky. The magic is just an illusion.
Is a smokescreen hiding decades of deliberate microscopic preparation.
So, if Oz Pearlman can steer the most difficult room in America by mastering 12 trainable habits, right. What is your excuse for the meeting you have tomorrow morning?
The tools are right in front of you. The question is whether you will start building your engine today.
Led by Jack Russo, Computer Law Group LLP is a bespoke business litigation and founder-friendly boutique law firm with offices and licensed attorneys in Silicon Valley, New York, and Tampa Bay. And you can reach Jack at jack@computerlaw.com and his team at www.computerlaw.com, where the newsletter we referred to is published in detail and readily available, commitment-free, with no paywalls or other charges.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.